Yeah, I'm recording another video. Um, Three things. I don't know if I've mentioned this before. I've recorded so many videos and not uploaded them, so excuse me if I'm repeating myself over and over again. Um, I had a bad day today, even though the medication worked and it kept me from totally going crazy. I still acted out. I was still in a pretty bad mood, and really, what I think it's come down to is I just realized a whole different level of my parents' psychopathy. I mean, what I, the few things that I'm going to mention now only came back to me in the past couple of weeks. And maybe I've mentioned them, but they're the most disturbing of all. And I think that's why I've really been miserable. One, I've already forgotten number three. I only remember two at the very moment. But they're disturbing as hell. One of them is, I may have mentioned it already, that my mother was calling my cousin when she was 13 and 14, around that age, and she was calling her often. My cousin told my brother that she considered my mother a close friend. She was confiding in her, and she thought she thought she had a friend. And then this cousin ended up with a boyfriend, and my mother completely dropped her, never called her again, completely discarded her. And my cousin actually made a point of telling my brother that she was very hurt. She didn't understand why. It was at the time of her life she really needed somebody. She had my mother for a couple of years there, and then all of a sudden, when she needed her even more for advice in the relationship or whatever, my mother was no longer around. She wouldn't even call her back, I think. A complete discard from the narcissist. Now, of course, what I realized just in the past couple of weeks is that my mother was obviously trying to groom that girl. She was going to, she would have molested her. She was going to seduce her or whatever. It's obvious. Why else would she have dropped her when she got a boyfriend? The girl was grossly underage. So my mother's also has pedophile tendencies. Maybe she learned from my brother, from my father. I don't know. Well, I'll tell you what I think it comes from. And this is the third thing. I did remember it. Good. Very disturbing. So, what's really disturbing about that, besides the fact that my mother would be a pedophile also, is that that was the daughter of the girl, of the woman. That was her sister's daughter. And that sister, she gave her borderline personality disorder and anorexia and killed her at 51. Now, at this point, my aunt was still alive, but still, it's like a really sick woman, you know. She's really, really ill. Now I realize it, that she's probably worse than my father in the end of the day. I know my father used to say many times to my mother, "Oh my God, you're so bad." Like even he was surprised at things she would do, and she was always telling me to lie and to tell people she wasn't home when she was, or to lie. You know, she would have me lie for her. She would offer to lie for me. She just had that in her. So when I realized that my mother also had those tendencies, and also within the family, well, then I started to think more deeply, and this is the other thing I'm going to tell you, number two, and it's that my mother has a brother, and this brother was known to be a criminal, and this is the brother that hooked up my parents in the strip club. What I'm pretty sure, from when I'm piecing things together, is that I know that my grandfather was not around. He would go to Cuba, apparently, because the prostitutes were $3 a piece. Um, I don't know if that's true, but it's not unheard of. Um, so my mother was left alone in the house with a younger brother who was maybe a year and a half younger, but he's a criminal. And I'm pretty sure I heard he was a pimp. So I have a feeling that he was pimping my mother because they have a very close relationship, and I would not be surprised if it was incestuous. Um, you know, now that I realize what my father had gone through, and that my mother accepted it, and that my mother is so sociopathic that she would try to seduce her own niece, well, then I started to think more deeply about her home life and realized, wait a second, what I did hear is that the father was never around. So who is left? The mother, which apparently she was very physically abusive but distant. So it's not like she got involved. She would just beat up my mother when she was very young, make her eat her vomit, all that disgusting stuff. I mean, my mother was tortured by her mother because her father was away using prostitutes. She blamed my mother. And I believe at some point that my uncle probably took advantage of the situation as a small-time hood, and my mother was probably wanting of male relationships, and look, she ended up as a stripper. So my mother got married at 22, so say she was a stripper for even just 2 years, that means 20 years old. Her little brother would have been 18, 19. I mean, it just makes total sense to me, especially because her brother was also an alcoholic and a cocaine addict. I've known that for years. She scapegoated him, but he is also that. I know that because at my bar mitzvah, he came into the room where all the boys were hanging out and tried to tell us how we should be cornering the girls and how we should be trying to get them alone, and et cetera, et cetera. So he definitely had a predatory mindset. And my parents were really upset with him because he was doing cocaine at my bar mitzvah, and apparently he was leaving lines everywhere and bags of it. He wasn't being very careful. So that's the second thing I thought of. Was like, my God, my mother probably comes also from an incestuous, abusive. See, my father's family was put him on a pedestal, but still he had the abuse from his father, sexual abuse. So I think my mother also had sexual abuse from her brother, I guess. His friends, maybe. And that's how he ended up hooking her up with my father, because he was pimping my mother, and he made the big deal, and I think he actually got a big cut out of it, because he ended up with a business around when my brother was born. He opened up a printing business. I don't know if I'm just that part. I don't know if that money came from that. I don't know if he got money for it, but I imagine he got some cut. Why else would he have done it? And here's the worst thing of all. Here's the thing that's really been pissing me off. This is the lowest of the low. This is the worst. This is the worst memory of all. This really defines the entire tragedy in the shortest possible way. Ugh, this has been killing me. You ready for this one? Maybe I mentioned it in passing, but it really captures the whole essence of the tragedy and the whole situation, and it confirms the whole. Are you ready? I'm sure I've said it. Maybe I haven't uploaded it. I remember this, and because my mother and father went through this little bit many times when we were very young, but we didn't understand. We'd be causing trouble. My brother and I would be, being boys, whatever, and they wouldn't want to deal with it, my parents. they were probably high on cocaine, looking back on it, right? And my mother would say, I don't want to deal with them. They're your boys. And then he would say, I didn't want them. And they would both walk away and leave us alone. But the important part was just they're your boys. I didn't want them. And that really defines everything. You know, my grandmother, my father's mother, she wanted to pass on the name. She wanted my father to, you know, to be a chameleon in the neighborhood, I suppose. So she pushed my mother to have children and to marry him and put money behind it. But essentially, the children were his, right? The grandmother, the mother, was my father's side. The money came. The marriage was made from her money. And she was the one who probably commanded my mother to have children. And then a second one, which was me. I'm sure of it. So she forced my mother to have children for my father. Well, my father didn't want children. My mother said that many times. And so now I've been remembering that only really in the past couple of weeks, and it's probably the most hurtful of all, because everything else I've remembered more or less has been about them. I didn't really remember. I remembered my mother not wanting to take me when I was a toddler. Like my father wanted to give me over, or my mother wanted to give me to my father to take, and I would scream and yell, "Don't let me go with him." You know, I'm pretty sure my father's a child rapist. When I think about it now, the way he used to attack me, and when I think about how he had one company he had a chicken farm. He was gonna raise chickens, you know, for poultry, and apparently it closed down because it was unionized. But also something came out about a kid with a broken leg, and you know, I put two and two together now, and I think my dad probably raped a kid and broke his leg. And I think in Mexico, when he was sent back for $250,000, I think he raped a boy. I think my father is a boy rapist. I don't think he's a molester. I mean, I think he's a real sick man, because he doesn't have a soft bone in his body to molest. He's a real psychopath. He's a maniac. Now, maybe he's mellowed over the years. I don't know. But back then, there's no way. So I think that his entire life has been about living in his offices. It's like a monster, like a creature. You know, showering at these gay clubs, so he wouldn't really need to have a shower. He'd use the bathroom in the office buildings. He always made sure to have office buildings that had 24-hour access. Now I know why. He always had a little couch on each office. So his whole life was probably having strange men over in his offices overnight, and that was just his whole life. He never really worked. He never really had much of a business. I think he had a couple of old friends here who had big restaurants that would order from him, you know, to give him a little bit of cash. But really, he was just, I think, a predatory kind of a creepy kind of a guy. The last place I saw his office was just downright spooky. All right, it was right next to the train tracks. It was isolated. He had the whole first floor. There was an office in the front that looked dilapidated and like disheveled and neglected. And in the back, he showed me this huge room. Like I think I mentioned it, 3,000 square feet. And it was just bare. And I can't imagine what kind of disgusting orgies he probably organized back there. I mean, I think that's his whole life, was being just in the shadows. You know, very similar to my ex-girlfriend. I mean, for any of you who don't know, I dated a girl after my brother died. She's the one really who triggered me into all this, and she ended up being not just a not just an escort and a prostitute, but the lowest of the low. When they would have gangbang parties where there would be one girl, and they would charge, let's say, each man $100 to take part of like 100 men and one woman, she would be that woman. She considers herself a sexual psychopath, and from what I know, she is like willing to do anything, and you know, she just has no moral compass. I mean, she confessed that to me when I first met her. She didn't understand right from wrong. For her, there was no right, wrong, and I think she was really. So she was, you know, a lot like my father. My father confessed he didn't have feelings for other people, didn't understand why he should feel bad for other people, which would make me think that he probably was a boy rapist, you know, real sicko. I think I can find that out. You hear that outside? Some lunatic yelling. This neighborhood is too loud. Anyways. So, I guess that used to be me 25 years ago. And I guess it was me yesterday, but I didn't sound so happy. Alright, I'm going to let everyone go. I've had a hard day. I don't know. So it's just this realization that really, my parents they weren't just narcissists and psychopaths who had children that they can use as objects. They didn't want children, neither of them. And they never liked us. I remember many times growing up, they looked at each other when they thought we weren't listening. One would say to the other one, "Do you like them?" The other one would say no, and the other one would go, "Me neither." Like they really didn't like us. I don't know how much my brother knew, consciously, but my brother was a narcissist. Not like them. He was just an he was a narcissistic borderline. He had similar tendencies as me to get into rage attacks, but he would never sit here in front of a camera and talk about his feelings. His feelings were buried deep, and now I know why. Because I think for the first 8 years of his life, he was my father's girlfriend. That's sick. I mean, today I was thinking really about, you know, I don't want to say it. I want to say it on video. Yeah. So I don't know what's gonna happen. Anyways, just wanted to upload this video. See you guys.